Well, we'd like to mention that we're happy to be here with your congregation this evening. Sorry I didn't get to be at your last circuit assembly. We missed being there, but we were at the School for Traveling Overseers in Patterson, so we missed out being with your circuit. But we're sure from what we hear that Brother Fields and Brother Meadows and their families took good care of you. And now we're back and happy to be with you. But when thinking of the title of this talk, and being perfect as a Heavenly Father's perfect, we know that if we truly admire someone, maybe you've done that, isn't it true we sometimes look close at them and we almost try to be like them? Have you ever noticed that? Because they've impressed us so much. Something has drawn us to them. In fact, haven't you heard young boys say, when I grow up, I want to be just like my daddy? You've heard that. And that's the way I felt as a young boy. It was a very impressive thing to watch my father. And you know, children get to think, well, their father can do just about anything. I believe my dad could. I believe he could. So I used to watch him very close, and I remember he had a funny little habit. When he would walk along, he would always hitch up his trousers like this. So when he ever saw me, you know what I was doing? Hitching up my trousers like that. Of course, today nobody pulls up their trousers anymore. That's the way it was. But the point is that if indeed we would like to imitate a person that we admire, how much more so should we imitate God? Shouldn't we want to be as Jehovah is, to the best of our ability? But now, when we think of that, how much does Jehovah require of us? Let's look at Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. In the 5th chapter, the 48th verse, you notice it says this. Jesus said, "You must accordingly be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Sounds almost impossible, isn't it? How could humans actually be perfect like their heavenly Father is perfect? Well, first of all, in order to see what's meant by that, we have to kind of rid ourselves of what we had in mind in the past. You know, we look at perfection, we think of something without limitations, unlimited, all-embracing, indicating supreme excellence in the most minute aspect. Now, all of us realize that only Jehovah could have such absolute perfection. So then the perfection of any other thing or person must be what? It must be relative. That is, a thing is perfect in relation to the purpose appointed for it by the designer, its producer, and user. And if the designer, producer, and user find no fault with it, what could it be called? Perfect. Well, with that in mind, let's illustrate what we're talking about, this relative perfection. And we don't have to be dissatisfied with it at all. Perhaps you have seen this happen. Suppose we walked around all the time with a high-powered microscope looking at everything that we viewed. Wouldn't objects take on different proportions? Appealing appearances would diminish, and it could be disappointing in many ways. For example, have you ever taken a ruler and drawn a line? And then you look at the line, you say, oh, that's perfectly straight. Look at it through a microscope. Probably ragged, wavy, so to speak. Or maybe your sisters wash clothes, and after you wash the clothes, you fold them and say, oh, perfectly clean laundry. Oh, sure. Try a microscope. You'd probably find those microscopic bits of foreign matter. Some of them might even move. Or have you ever gone to a home and maybe they have a coffee table, you're sitting there on the couch talking to whoever it is, and you look at the coffee table, some of them are so perfect looking, and you run your hand over it and you say, oh, it's perfectly smooth. But through a microscope, it probably looked like the moon's surface. So, would it make any difference, though, in our use of these things if all those microscopic factors were eliminated. Why should it? You see, while we could be dissatisfied with all these things as being imperfect, why should we? Such a demanding attitude would be impractical, we could say even foolish, and it would bring into our life a lot of exasperation and discontent. And imagine if Jehovah walked around looking at us through a microscope. We're dead. We wouldn't get anywhere, would we? Not at all. So the Bible presents the word perfection in a sensible and realistic way. In fact, the very same Greek word which is rendered perfect in Matthew 5 verse 48 can also be translated complete. So if you're using the RBI 8 this evening, the larger Bible with the footnotes, you would find in Matthew 5 verse 48, it uses that word complete. Another translation reads this way. Notice the interesting rendering. It says, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Then in brackets, that is, go into complete maturity of godliness of mind and character, having reached the proper height of virtue and integrity. In other words, that Jehovah would require. In 1 Corinthians 14:20, it puts it this way. It says, brothers, do not become young children of powers of understanding, but be as babes to badness, yet become full-grown in powers of understanding. Now in Hebrews 5 verse 14, it uses the word mature. Now let's illustrate what we're talking about by looking at various texts, just a couple of them. Turn to Genesis 6 verse 9. This is a very familiar text to us because, as you know, it deals with Noah. But in the 9th verse, now you pick out a word that should stand out in our mind in description of this man, Noah. Verse 9 says, this is a history of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He proved himself faultless among his contemporaries. Noah walked with the true God. You notice the word we're going to keep in mind there is that Noah was found faultless among his contemporaries. Now let's look at Job chapter 1 and verse number 8. Now a key word here will stand up too. Because in Job 1:8 it says, and Jehovah went on to say to Satan, have you set your heart upon my servant Job, that there's no one like him in the earth, a man blameless and upright, fearing God and turning aside from bad. So Noah is spoken of as faultless. Job is spoken of as blameless. Did it mean they were without sin? Obviously not, because where did they descend from? And who did they descend from? The sinner Adam. So why are they called faultless or blameless? Well, let's use a couple of texts just to fold that all together for us. Turn to Micah chapter 6. And in the 6th chapter, let's read verses 7 and 8. First of all, we have the questions entertained in verse 7. And there it says, will Jehovah be pleased with thousands of rams, with tens of thousands of torrents of oil? Shall I give my firstborn son for my revolt, the fruit of my belly for the sin of my soul? Now verse 8. He has told you, earthling man, what is good. And what is Jehovah asking back from you but to exercise justice and love kindness and to be modest in walking with God? Now let's turn to 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. In the 22nd verse, in turn Samuel said, does Jehovah have as much delight in burnt offerings and in sacrifices as in obeying the voice of Jehovah? Look, to obey is better than a sacrifice, to pay attention than the fat of rams. So what stands out in our mind? Remember we said that Noah was looked at as being faultless. Job as blameless. How could they be spoken of in that way? Those following verses, Micah 6 and 1 Samuel 15, help us to see they walked with God. And when you walk with someone, isn't it true to keep pace? Noah, others who are faithful, never ran ahead of Jehovah. They never lagged behind. They walked with him. and they obeyed God, and Jehovah never ever required more than they can give. He's not that kind of God. So he mercifully and reasonably took into account the imperfection and disabilities of his earthly servants, but he still judged them as perfect in that sense. To illustrate what Jehovah is like, though, think of a father. Would a father expect the same performance out of his small son as he would a full-grown man? Not at all. Now, the Watchtower illustrated it this way. It said a potter would not expect the same quality when molding a vase from ordinary clay as he would when forming one from special refined clay. Now, that makes sense. And Jehovah, of course, is the great potter, or spoken of as such in Isaiah 64, verse 8. So he takes into consideration the inherent weaknesses of his human servants. So we're glad for that, aren't we? If he judged us any other way or dealt with us in any other way, how disappointing it would really be. In fact, here's a very heartening text, Psalm 103. And no doubt we've read this many times for encouragement. The 103rd Psalm, verses 13 and 14. As a father shows mercy to his sons, Jehovah showing mercy to those fearing him. And here's the point that stands out, verse 14. For he himself well knows the formation of us, remembering that we are dust. Another translation puts it very nicely. It says, as a father loves and pities his children, so the Lord loves and pities those who fear him with reverence, worship, and awe. Now notice this last part of that verse. For he knows our frame. He earnestly remembers and imprints on his heart that we are dust. Jehovah's view. We're glad it's that way. But remember, on the basis of that text, once again, Jehovah does not expect more from us than we can actually give. Now, that's the way that Jehovah deals with us. And we think of his extreme perfection. How do we deal with others? In other words, when we look at others, do we sometimes expect more from them than they can really give? In other words, we're looking at absolute perfection. Is that reasonable? That's unbalanced, isn't it? Jehovah doesn't expect of us. Should we expect it of others? But sometimes we do expect it of others. Let's see if we can illustrate that locally. You have elders in your congregation. Do we sometimes expect perfection out of elders? No, we have to give you a revelation now. They're not. But sometimes we expect it of them. And maybe it's because we see them so often and we know what the spiritual qualifications are. We've read Timothy and Titus like everybody else, have we not? But then they're always in front of the congregation, isn't it true? We see them often. They give public talks. They give talks on the Theocratic Ministry School. They give parts on the Circuit Assembly. They're always in front. And when somebody's always in front, we tend to look at them more than others, and if we're not cautious, we can start judging. And we could be critical of these brothers, expecting perfection in the superlative degree from imperfect people. So what do? We kind of put them in the limelight because they're always in front. You know what a limelight is in the theater? You remember what that is. The light's always on the character that has to draw the attention. If there's a character now who they want to stand out and he's on the platform, then when he moves, what happens? That light moves with him. And so they always see it. Their attention is always featured on that person. So sometimes we do that with the elders. Our attention's focused on them, and because we see them so much, we begin to draw conclusions. And our thinking runs to the extreme, almost as if expecting more of them than other humans sometimes. And maybe they can't produce the kind of things we're thinking about. You know, there's another kind of limelight. Did you know that? There's the one that's in the theater, and there's one that is used when it comes to heavy metals. So what they do to check metals, and when they do that for metals that would hold intense weight, extreme weight, to put it that way, they check for cracks or flaws because they want to know it can bear the weight. So how do they do that? They have a system they call Magnaflux. You ever heard of that? So what they do is they put the Magnaflux of the fluid on that piece of metal. It could be a beam that holds tremendous weight. And then when they put the light on it, what happens is Magnaflux, and that's exactly what it's dealing with, is like magnetic. And with the light, all that metal, the metal shavings and things that make up the Magnaflux just kind of draw to the cracks, the weak spots. You know where they are. So it can strengthen them. So do we put our brothers in the limelight? We look at them this way and that way, looking for little weaknesses, flaws. Would that be fair? You know, we can't expect more from the elders than others in many ways, because it's been said that elders are nothing but sheep in shepherd's clothing. They're people, just like the rest of us. So what we need to do is get rid of our microscope. I thought it was very interesting. You might remember it was an article in the magazines at one time. It was during a Gilead graduation, and a member of the governing body, Brother Loesch, used an illustration. And that would fit the circumstances we're talking about very well this evening. You might remember that he said that when we deal with our brothers, and of course you know how it is, a Gilead graduate, where's he going to go? He's going to go to some foreign country. He's going to live in a missionary home. And when you're in a missionary home, you have a family. It's like you live together. Isn't it true? Like Bethel, I mean, you live together. And so when you're close together with others, you tend to look at weaknesses. So what did he tell them to do? He said, just take off your spiritual binoculars. You've used binoculars. And when you look through a binocular, what does it do? Does it not magnify things? You can see certain things about what you're looking at that you can never see with the naked eye, because it draws it up close. So what did he say to do? Turn them around. Do you remember that? Now when you turn your binoculars around, what happens? Things are far removed, isn't it true? I know as a kid I used to do that in the car. If you're trying to look backwards through the binoculars riding, well, don't try that. That's more than enough. But you can look at something when they're turned around, it just removes it to such a distance that you can't see flaws or weaknesses you might see when it's close up. Now, wasn't that good advice? Turn your binoculars around, he said. So in the missionary homes, they're going to live, they're going to get along together, you've got to look for the positive. So you have to remove the negative. So turn them around, spiritually speaking, and look at them from a distance. And it brings more satisfaction. And really, when it comes right down to it, would it be right for the congregation to do that, the elders to look at them with a critical view, expecting perfection? And we could reverse that. And couldn't we say, too, that would it be right for the elders to expect perfection of others within the congregation? You know, a person couldn't live like that. Sometimes we don't see our own imperfections. You remember that old expression? Let's see, how did it go? There's an expression that said, I had a note on it. Oh, yes. Faults in others I can see, but thank the Lord there's none in me. So sometimes we think we're perfect. Everybody else has a problem but us, I guess. The Watchtower 9111, 1 page 30. 9111, 1 page 30. It's called Do You Appreciate Jehovah's Earthly Organization? And then it said avoid viewing others with a critical eye. That was the heading. But now the paragraph says this just below that. But we must recognize that this worldwide organization consists of imperfect humans. So what would happen if we viewed it through a figurative microscope? Yes, we'd find there are sinful tendencies and personality flaws in individuals who are part of it. And then they cite Romans 3:23. So while we're reading this paragraph, let's turn there. And very short and to the point, but reasonable in this sense when it says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." True, isn't it? Now the article continues. The Apostle Paul admitted he had such flaws, and then they use Romans 7:21 as a text we can relate to. Remember, he said, "When I wish to do what is right, what is bad is present with me." And then it goes on to say, every Christian experiences the same conflict. All make mistakes. Moreover, sooner or later, many suffer because of someone else's mistakes. Should we be discouraged or disenchanted with when the flaws and imperfections of fellow Christians come to light? Should that diminish our appreciation for Jehovah's organization? Of course not, the article said. Rather, we should step away from the microscope, as it were, and quit focusing on the imperfections of individuals. And there's something else about Jehovah that's so wonderful for us, and that is he doesn't expect the same performance out of every individual in the congregation. He doesn't expect them all just to be the same. There's a balanced viewpoint. The Watchtower one time said this, and we can see how it's true when we think about not everybody should be the same as others. It can be the same as others. It said, as a craftsman knows, each tool is designed to do its work. And then it made kind of a humorous comment. It said, can a hammer make the fine hole a drill does? Or will a plane be used to shape wood effectively, or one that's used to shape it effectively drive in a screw? No. For each tool has its proper use. Each person, each personality is different. And they have their use, isn't it true? Note the comments of one brother in the 97 Watchtower, 6-1, page 27. 97, 6-1, 27. The heading, Human Weaknesses Magnify Jehovah's Power. It's about Arthur, an anointed Christian who loyally served Jehovah for some 7 decades. He observed this. He said, weaknesses in fellow servants create for us an area for integrity, testing our Christian mettle. If we allow what humans say or do to interfere with our serving Jehovah, we're serving humans. Besides, our brothers must love Jehovah too. If we look for the good in them, we soon see they're not so bad after all. Then the 86 Watchtower, 12-1, page 15. Taking a notice, W86, 12-1, page 15. Do you have the mind of Christ? It gives this example. It said on one occasion after a special preaching campaign, Jesus showed great consideration for the apostles. Although perfect, Jesus did not expect perfection from others. At the end of a preaching campaign, he did not insist the apostles immediately go back to the preaching and do even better. He was considerate of their need for rest and took them to a lonely place for privacy. Now recall, in the first part of the discussion, we used Hebrews chapter 5, verse number 14. And the rendering we touched on, the word mature, when considering the aspect of completeness. But let's read that entire text at this time, see if we can get the flavor of it. Hebrews 5:14. And we've many times read it, but the text tells us, but solid food belongs to mature people, to those who through use have the perceptive powers trained to distinguish both right and wrong. So how then does one become mature? You notice how Paul closed the verse? What did he say? He said, to those who through use have the perceptive powers trained to distinguish both right and wrong. So one doesn't automatically then fall into the framework of faultlessness, or one who's mature, but rather they need to be trained. The Kingdom Interlinear, maybe you're accustomed to reading that from time to time. In Hebrews 5:14 it says, having been trained like a gymnast. Does it take effort on their part? Now, you don't find much written on this, at least in our journals, but I think it's kind of interesting that, you know the name Bruce Jenner, you've heard that before? Well, he did excel, did he not, in the Olympic Games? But you know, before he got involved in the Olympics, he trained for 12 years. And then what about Peggy Fleming? I know some of us remember that name. Some of the youth would not. Between the ages of 9 to 19, she spent 20,000 hours skating. So isn't that remarkable? So when they're born, were they just athletic? They just had that ability? Well, they might have been natural in some ways when it comes to athletic ability, but that ability had to be trained. They had to have training, and then they excelled because of that. Now, one way we can do that, that is to have our perceptive powers trained, which we like to discuss this evening, is by accepting counsel, which is realistically part of our training, isn't it? You know, we receive a lot of counsel, don't we? When you read the Watchtower, you find you're getting counsel. Have you ever read the Watchtower and said, oh, that article is written just for me? It just seems to fit like a glove. Or maybe we read not just the Watchtower article, but maybe we're doing our daily Bible reading. And isn't it true, whether it's the Watchtower, the Bible, or the Kingdom Ministry, we are getting counsel, we're getting direction from Jehovah's organization. And oftentimes we say, I love it, I want to just hear how it is. We love counsel. But now what if you get counsel directly from a person in your local congregation, an elder, not from the Watchtower, not from the Bible, not from the KN, but from a local brother? How do we like that? And when we get counsel, do we really want to hear how we're doing, or we just love to generalize? We don't want to get too specific because that's not tasteful to us sometimes. Like Israel, remember in our book on Isaiah chapter 30, verse 10, Israel said, speak to us smooth things. They just wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. In other words, the old expression, don't ruffle my feathers, they didn't want to have that happen. They were not open to counsel in that way. Let's think about how that can all develop now, just to illustrate it. Have you ever said to somebody, brother, sister, so-and-so, I'd like to bring something to your attention. A little weakness, a little flaw in your personality. Could be the lack of self-control. So the conversation goes like this. We made the suggestion their problem is they lack self-control. And in return, he or she says to us, no, you've got it all wrong. I've got a lot of faults. Self-control isn't one of them, I'm sure of that. Well, what are your faults? Well, I've got a lot of faults. Especially which one? Well, everything. All kinds of faults. I'm such a weak person. I'm so imperfect. We just love generalities. Don't be specific. You see, the only way we can learn if there's something that hits the head of the nail, isn't it true? Hits the point for us. Being specific. Not hard, not unkind, but straight enough to see the point. But we love generality, some of us. But if we do, we're not really being trained. So we say, yes, I agree and with you, and one of those faults is a patience. No, it's not one of them. That's not it. Now we're being too specific. You see, I've got a lot of faults, but impatience isn't one of them. Well, what are your faults? Oh, everything. Just everything. I have a lot of faults. So again, we love being general, don't we? We hate to face the fact that we have definite flaws, but isn't it true we can see the flaws of others? It's crystal clear what they need to work on, but not us at times. So again, we need to make an effort, because that is part of our training. Have you ever heard this before? Maybe you've read it before. It says, isn't it funny when the other fellow takes a long time to do something is slow? When I take a long time to do something, I'm thorough. When the other fellow doesn't do it, he's lazy. When I don't do it, I'm busy. When the other fellow does it without being told, he's overstepping his bounds. When I go ahead and do it without being told, that's initiative. When the other fellow states his opinion strongly, he's bullheaded. When I state my opinion strongly, I'm firm. When the other fellow overlooks a few rules of etiquette, he's rude. When I skip a few rules of etiquette, I'm doing my own thing. Do you know what Jehovah could really do? Really? Do you know what he could do? He could look all around the world, and he could choose from among Jehovah's Witnesses 70 personalities very similar to ours. And he could bring those 70 personalities into one congregation. How would you like that? Just like yours. 16 others, just like yours. Would you enjoy that? Wouldn't it be nice? Everybody thinks exactly like us. Everyone's outlook is the same. Everyone's like our very best friend, and the whole congregation is complete. We live happily together, never having a crossword, never any problems or difficulties. No one ever get upset. Then along comes Armageddon, and Jehovah destroys the whole congregation. Why? Well, because no one saw the need to make changes. We're beautiful. we're all right, when indeed we're not. We are not perfect. So the question is, though, as we come down the line through this discussion, do we really want to be perfect as Jehovah's perfect? You know, on one occasion, a rich young man approached Jesus and asked him a question. It's found in Matthew chapter 19. Verses 16 through 20. And notice how all of this develops, because we're talking about being perfect. So Matthew chapter 19, let's begin reading verse 16. Now look, a certain one came up to him and said, Teacher, what good must I do in order to get everlasting life? He said to him, Why do you ask me about what is good? One there is that is good. If though you want enter into life, observe the commandments continually. He said to him, Which ones? Jesus said, Why, you must not murder, you must not commit adultery, you must not steal, you must not bear false witness. Honor your father and your mother, and you must love your neighbors yourself. The young man said to him, I've kept all these. What yet am I lacking? You see, he was, isn't it true, in reading this text, you can tell he was obeying the law's commandments. But Jesus showed him that his worship was lacking in a number of ways. Now, notice chapter 19, verse 21. Now, this is what we're really talking about. Jesus said to him, If you want to be perfect, go sell your belongings and give to the poor, and you have treasure in heaven, and come be my follower. So what do you think? You think this young fellow wanted to be perfect? What did Jesus tell him to do? Go sell all your possessions, give to the poor, come after me, be my follower. Well, let's see what happens in verse 22, and you know what this reads, how this reads. When the young man heard this saying, he went away grieved, was holding many possessions. Can we not see that the word completeness enters the picture? The young man could have done exactly like the other disciples of Jesus Christ had done, but he didn't want to convert his wealth into a means of aiding others. Now, how different the attitude of Jehovah, who gave his most valuable treasure, his own son, Jesus Christ. It moved him to give that son, his son, in behalf of the world of mankind. And this young man didn't want to give up his material possessions. It meant more to him than accompanying God's Son in the ministry. So today, what are we saying? It's not a question of being asked to do the impossible, something beyond our reach, when Jesus said, you must be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. But rather, it's a matter of doing the best we can within our limitations to meet the standard that is attainable. And as we make such efforts, we need to be aware of the efforts of others, not being overcritical, shortcomings and weaknesses, as well as lend a hand where they need help to go on progressing and serving God. If we do so, we'll have the pleasure and joy of knowing that on the basis of the ransom sacrifice of Jesus Christ, what's Jehovah going to do? He's going to accept our efforts as perfect. And doesn't that bring pleasure to the heart? And one thing that illustrates our willingness to do what God requires of us, just like the young man turned down the opportunity to be in the ministry, would give up his possessions. Sometimes even among us, some just don't see the need of being out of the ministry. But wouldn't that indicate that we want to be rich toward God if we did so? You know, years ago, we used to be so different, didn't we? We had goals and quotas, and we really worked to fulfill those goals and quotas. In fact, when your circuit overseer, like Brother Meadows and his wife came, we had a goal for that week. Do you remember that? We did. For that week, we go out in the service, remember, 5 hours. You recall that? And we'd really worked to attain the goal. And also to start one Bible study. So that's good for us because we need to be busy in service, do we not? And isn't it true that when we're busy in the field doing the will of God, we don't have time to be critical of others? The most critical people in the world today in Jehovah's arrangement are those who don't do what they should be doing. Maybe it's because they're looking at their own circumstances and they recognize they're not doing so well. And maybe it's something within them causes that. But if we're happy, we're liberal in putting hours in the service, maybe we can't pioneer, but if we're out there doing our very best, spending as much time as possible, and working with others, we wouldn't be critical. Will Rogers one time said, I don't like that man, I guess I'm going to have to get to know him better. So if we're out in the service, working with others, we get to know them, to love them. That's part of our assignment, and that's a demonstration on our behalf that we want to be perfect as Jehovah is perfect. So what a way to be judged by our Almighty God. What a wonderful way it is that we can spend the week in service with you friends. Of course, Friday we can't, because now we have the Pioneer meeting at 9:30 Friday morning, isn't that right? And of course, we'll be out tomorrow. We can't stay out real late. Usually we stay till 5, but we have rehearsals about 7 and 6:30. We're going to be there. And then on Thursday we have the elders meeting, don't we? What time is that, Brother Miller?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. So the schedule's kind of full. And then, of course, the Circuit Assembly on the weekend. Now, did we have any programs left for the Circuit Assembly? If you have your program, we just might mention a couple of things about it. Truly, this is a Circuit Assembly that's a wonderful instrument when it comes to training us and giving us counsel and direction like we've been talking about. You notice if you just drop down the afternoon on Saturday, the symposium at 1:45, manifesting the wisdom from above in our life. Now notice the 4 areas. Wisdom from above is first of all chaste. The second, doing our part in being peaceable. And number 3, being reasonable in a decision making. And the last, be ready to obey organizational direction. We must say that it's a very straightforward assignment, practical and balanced for all of us. Brother Meadows talk additional aspects of wisdom from above, and then 3:25 speak God's wisdom as Paul did. Now let's just move across to Sunday at 10:15. You notice the symposium? Pursue the things that are upbuilding is the theme. 4 aspects to that. Not all things build up. At congregation meetings in our ministry, and then within the family circle. And then, of course, the rest of the program. The public address, if you have anyone attending, which we've mentioned this to those at the Circuit Assembly, this is a basic talk they can follow easily. Maybe they're unbaptized persons who are coming to meetings, or those want to attend, though at some distance. How godly wisdom benefits us, and then the 2 closing talks. So it's a very fine assembly. The theme in the front, be guided by the wisdom from above. That's from James chapter 3, verse 17. So you'll appreciate very much the fine program and the wonderful time we'll have there at the Circuit Assembly. Now I think on service on Thursday, that's the worldly holiday, isn't it? So we talked about maybe meeting at 9:30 instead of 9, if that's suitable to you in the congregation, because some are not up very early, I'll tell you that, on holidays. But it's a good day to be out. Now, when we think of that, we talked about going in the field. How many of us are really working secularly that day? Not many of us. How many are here tonight? Did anyone count them?
81.
81. So how many should be out in service on Thursday? 3? 4? Well, these folks are busy. They'll be gone. So we should have 79. Now, wouldn't that be a goal? Let's have a week's goal. Let's all be out. You'll live. You won't die going out in the early holiday. And if you do, that's all right. You died in the service. What a way to go. That's positive. That's perfect. But let's see if we can do that. Let's talk it up among the friends. If we could get 75, 79 out of the service, what a wonderful thing that would be. We used to see that years gone by. But they're gone by. So let's bring them back. Let's bring them back and see what we can do. So we look forward to being with you. Brother Meadows is going to have the privilege of conducting that morning, so you can come and be rough on him for the evening service. So we look forward to that, as well as tomorrow morning and other times for meetings. Well, let's stand. We're going to sing our last 2 songs. Our last song, rather. Song number 10 is our last song, and we're going to invite Brother Meadows up. He's going to give the prayer for us. Song number